to you all, and thanks for coming out on this bright, sunny day. It's nice to see the warmth come back after a fairly cold and cool May. I have to say it's a real honor and a privilege to be here at Chats of Champions. So many times I've sat in the audience and heard great talks about German prisoner of war camps up in north and other book readings, Bruce Coffin reading about his books and whatnot. So it's an honor to be, and actually quite humbling to be on the other side of this podium talking with you. Also, I gotta say that this library is indeed a special place, as you know very well. It was for me a refuge from summer visitors. When I was writing Partisan Farnsy, I would sequester myself up on the balcony there and figure out what comes next. I know that probably a good portion of you have come just to see who this fellow is who had the audacity to write something about your hometown, which has become, in a very real sense, our hometown. As Becky said, we've been coming here for a long time. And I've actually done the statistics. I've calculated as a 73-and-a-half-year-old how much of my time has been spent in Maine, counting up all the vacations in the 4 years we spent at Colby together, and various vacations in Damariscotta Lake and the lakes over in the Pemmican Peninsula, and visiting Carolyn's family, who was strewn up and down the coast of Maine. Her parents are originally from Maine. And I figured that I am actually, by my calculations, 11.6% Mainer. So it's not bad. It doesn't make me a Mainer yet, but I'm trying. Anyway, we love coming to Damariscotta. And I have to say, what other town in Maine, I challenge you, find another town in Maine that has 2 debut novels written about it. Take that, Bar Harbor. Anyway, I refer to Adam White's book, The Mid-Coast, reviewed nicely in the New York Times. And I think every bookshelf in Damariscotta certainly has room for 2 novels about the city, the town. I guess Carol and I knew we were part of or felt like we were part of the fabric and home in Damariscotta when at Waltz Soda Fountain a couple of years ago, pre-COVID obviously, Becky behind the counter and I started talking about weight loss techniques. So we had gotten that familiar, and she knew how I liked my coffee, usually black, like Farnsy. I have to say that writing, and I wanted to talk briefly about the process of writing and how Farnsy came about, but writing is a really solitary act. You can't do it, I guess there are teams of people who write novels, but it's usually carried out solo in a quiet place like here, or our little spot in Edgecombe on the Damariscotta River, and sometimes out in Skokie, where we had a home until this March. The oddity about writing about Damariscotta was that sometimes it was early on easier to write about Damariscotta when I wasn't in Edgecombe or in Damariscotta, so I had some distance, and that distance kind of distilled the facts that I wanted to bring up in the novel. But then, of course, I wrote in the balcony here, as I said, and then our place in Edgecombe. The editing part, it requires other eyes, and my first eyes were my wife, Carolyn, here in the front row, and then my sisters, as you'll hear soon. Editing is a little bit, I call it like whack-a-mole, that carnival game where you whack the mole as it pops up, and you find adjectives that are off, or a verb that's off, or a little factoid that's off, and you're trying to read this thing for consistency. So editing was an interesting process. It was also the process by which I found, and thanks to COVID, and that was an interesting fact as well. COVID, as bad as it was, and it still is, hello, Chase, thanks for coming. It gave me the chance, after 2 or 3 months of not looking at Farnsy, to come back to it fresh, and I could easily see which chapters just didn't fit the story anymore, or didn't represent the Farnsy that I had come to know as I wrote the book. So editing, it was also, I was fortunate to find Maine Authors Publishing up in Thomaston. The book was originally read by Yonenport Press, and they said they liked it, but they didn't have room for more mysteries. Well, if you've read parts of Farnsy, you realize there's a little mystery in there, but it's not a big-time crime mystery. But nonetheless, Maine Authors Publishing is a great outfit, and I commend them to you if you're thinking about writing memoirs or children's books or what have you. Their team is actually very stellar. In actuality, it's the only Maine-owned publishing company in Maine. So anyway, the time comes when you feel like your bit of scribbling is finished. And at some point last fall, that time came about, and I wanted to get Farnsy in on the catalog, the spring-summer catalog with Min-Office Publishing, because I had to get it off my chest, off my desk. It was kind of done. And I'll liken that to a conversation I had with a friend of ours, Alan McGee, up the coast. I think Jane knows him and others may know of his artwork. I asked him one time, how do you know, Alan, when your painting is done? And he said, when it hums. Well, Farnsy didn't start humming to me, I guarantee you that. But it somehow felt finished. So that's when an author comes to an audience like this and says, what do you think? And I'll let you have a chance to read a few selections at the end. I want to insert a couple of private observations, and that is about narration. All creatures communicate. All creatures communicate, even the basic planaria that I used to study in high school biology class. But only humans narrate in the past tense. We tell stories. This is our tense, the human tense. Whales can communicate across vast distances. I think there's a shift of a layer of ocean, a certain temperature. Whales can communicate across hundreds of miles, their squeaks and their noises. But no whale so far has written a story about a peg-legged man named Ahab who hunted whales. Only humans do that. We listen to stories when we're growing up, and we start telling stories almost as soon as we can talk. I know this from our grandkids. Our hunger for a good story never ends. We tell family stories. We tell stories around the bubbler, if there are bubblers still, or fountains, whatever you call them. Midwest, I think it's called a bubbler. Or on Zoom or gossip lists and various social media. If you think storytelling is dead, guess again. Just grab a coffee over at Waltz's and sit there and listen to people talk. But then who dares to put pen to paper and tell a story and then hold it out there? You got to be crazy, actually. Which is kind of funny because when I was an exchange student in Germany, there was a woman, and we went to Austria to do some skiing in a very simple farmhouse. And the older woman there in this Austrian villa, it was a farm, and she had this huge wheel, a Spinnrad, or spinning wheel, and she was spinning yarn while we were there. And we observed, this seemed like some kind of antique, but she was spinning real yarn, and she made real sweaters from that yarn. And the verb spinnen, as you spin a yarn, the verb spinnen also means to be crazy. So we would often say, as I was learning German, die Dame spinnt, the lady, it either means she's crazy or it means she's spinning at her wheel. So you don't know. So I guess maybe I'm crazy. The crazy thing is, Farnsworth forgot his toothpaste. 4 words. With those 4 words, the novel Farnsy began to emerge. It was a simple writer's prompt given to me by Sharon and Steve Pfeiffer, who still run the Wesley Writers Workshop in Evanston, Illinois, on Wesley Avenue. Steve writes nonfiction and Sharon writes fiction. You may know her books all have kind of the word crazy stuff or new stuff, great little mysteries. They had a prompt that came out. Every 6 weeks we presented our material, and I was writing at the time a novel set in Germany, a very dark novel, which was harder to write, a little more sinister. And every other week we had a prompt, and they gave us this prompt. Farnsworth forgot his toothpaste. And I started writing, and out of it came a policeman set in Damascus. I have no idea where that came from. It's popped out. Now you ask yourself, do you see that phrase anywhere? In this book, Farnsworth forgot his toothpaste? No, you don't. That didn't make it. But it was like the catalyst, the starting point. And I started writing. Farnsy emerged in pieces, and I liken it to my sister's quilting, where I was writing 2 or 3 pages of Farnsy stuff every few weeks. I'd have Farnsy watching the 4th of July fireworks in Damascus. In fact, read the chapter on the 4th of July fireworks and then go see them this week. He was just a curious character, and I wanted to find out more about him. And it's really true that you can't force a character into being and say, I wanted to be this way. In fact, I defy you to find any description of Farnsy. I have kind of in mind of who that policeman is, or Lucy, or Doc, but I didn't describe him in detail. I didn't want to. Other times I described Farnsy sitting in an ice shack with Doc playing cribbage, whether doing a stakeout, waiting for this person or persons, whoever is breaking into cottages, looking for Necco wafers and fishing lures. I kept a notepad handy to write down any ideas or thoughts or statements or phrases that pop into my mind, and they pop into your mind at the weirdest times, middle of the night sometimes. If you don't write them down, you'll lose them. If you're writing things down, if you're thinking of writing something, write them down. Eventually, I had over 400 pages of short scenes, which was discouraging because when you saw them spread out, it was like a chaos of Farnsiness and what's going on here. Well, the fact was that they kind of aggregated around seasons, fall, summer, you know the seasons. And I stitched them together in what I'll call a narrative quilt. So it began to take shape. If a new scene was needed, I wrote it. I thought, well, okay, they need to have a scene where Doc does thus and such. The main character is Doc, who's a retired dentist, who's writing the history of Damariscotta, daily history at Waltz's Soda Fountain. You have the professor, who is a retired feminist professor for feminist philosophy. You have Henry, the Maine Coon cat, et cetera, Netta Barnes, and a gal from Portland, an old girlfriend of his from college days. So the characters emerged in these little scenes. Anyway, if you wonder why I wrote it, I just wanted to capture somehow the essence of the town. That was the motivation that began when it became kind of a novel and emerging. I wanted to try to capture the essence of the town and the characters in it. Sometimes I had little writing rituals I'd engage in. I would sit down and kind of meditative, and in the morning always. And whenever I thought I lost the narrative thread, when I thought, okay, it's been a couple of months since I've written something about Farnsy. During COVID, that was the case. I had part of Farnsy off with an editor, and I took a couple of months off. It took longer than expected for that editor to go through the material. And when it merged, it was clearer what belonged or what didn't belong. Sometimes I'd even ask the muses, no kidding. You know, in Homer's Odyssey, the poet says, "Come, O muse, and help me tell the story of brave Ulysses." Sometimes I said, I need some help here. What's going to go on next? And I think it kind of worked. Like Doc, the character, the dentist in Farnsy says, it's all quantum stuff. It's a mystery in life. I tried to tell a story about this town without caricature, and try to avoid cliches about Maine, Mainers, or policemen. And I actually did a word count the other day. There were only 8 ayunks in the whole book. So I think I passed that test. Anyway, I have to tell you that whenever I read parts of Farnsy, and that'll probably happen this morning as well, I sometimes wonder who the heck wrote this stuff. It's not bad. Anyway, before I read a few excerpts from Farnsy, and I promise you I'll read just 3 shorties, I want to thank a few people in the room and some people who are not here. I want to first thank the librarians, Carol Anthony, my wife, Pam Gormley, who is not here, former librarian at Skidompha, Terry Happock, who was the head librarian in the library, and also Carol Fraser Fowler, who is a retired librarian and a neighbor of ours. For preserving Waltz's Soda Fountain, I want to thank profusely Christy and Dean Jacobs and Kim and Kimberly in the back row here for keeping Waltz's Soda Fountain alive. And best of luck this year as you reopen. I hope you sell ice cream and sodas and lime brickies and keep a black coffee for me now and then. And are the donuts coming back? I hope they are. Anyway, it'll be bring your own donut day. I also want to thank the Rennie family. I'm not sure if anybody is here from the Rennie family. Mary, Kate, Bob, and John for helping me with information about the history of Rennie's and the Waltz Soda Fountain, and also for keeping Rennie's alive, which, like Waltz's, is the main classic. In absentia, I'd like to thank Kirk Vashaw, the CEO of the Spengler Candy Company, who sent us a 40-pound box of Necco wafers in May, in which I will share again with Jason Warlick, Chief of Police in Damariscotta. They've already gotten 1 box, and Jason told me maybe a few weeks ago, he said, the team has already eaten half of it. So anyway, it's not product placement, but anyway, I wanted to make sure that you knew that Necco wafers played a role in this. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I want. Again, I get no money for this product display. Anyway, But I want to thank Jason in all sincerity for all we did several interviews in person and for answering my email questions, some of them really silly questions, but about police equipment, police procedure, and what it's like to be a policeman. And the long list of two-page list, I think, of equipment that Farnsy has, and I think it's the second or third chapter. I put it in purposely, and I thought of Tim O'Brien's book, The Things They Carried, which is about Vietnam and what soldiers carried in Vietnam. And I wanted people to understand indirectly that police work ain't just about donuts and coffee and chit-chat at Waltz's pharmacy, Waltz's Soda Fountain, but rather it entails all kinds of things you have to think about and be prepared for, all kinds of eventualities. So I hope it's slightly humorous, but not at the expense of policemen and policewomen. So I thank you for that, Chief. I really appreciate it. And by the way, Farnsy, neither Farnsy nor the Chief in this book is based on any real personality. So as far as I know, Chief does not make venison beef jerky, although I think he may have liked Necco wafers. Anyway, so before I read a couple short pieces from Farnsy, to wet your whistle, I want to just simply give you the broad overview. The story opens with William Phineas Farnsworth sitting in a police cruiser. You know that spot next to the Lincoln Theater, reserved? I know where it is. So anyway, don't all of us slow down a little bit when we go by there? Anyway, that's where Farnsy's sitting watching the summer tourists come by. So I wanted to play with that dichotomy a little bit. But he still can't stop thinking about Lucy, his ex-high school sweetheart, who's now, he's divorced from Earl, the lobsterman, about a year, and he may or may not have heard that Lucy's back in town. At some point, he bumps into her, and I'll read that section of that scene, a bit of that scene later. Over at Waltz's, after he bumps into Lucy in her hair salon here on Main Street, he goes to Waltz's and he starts hearing about some kind of mysterious Necco wafers, these rolls of Necco wafers appearing in summer cottages, rental cottages, in cottages along Damascotta Lake and Pembroke Pond and Biscay Pond and whatnot. And then eventually he learns about some fishing lures, some fishing tackle boxes that are missing or maybe not missing, people don't know, and he's starting to piece things together. Then Farnsy, over at his lake cottage on Damascotta Lake, based kind of on a rental we had once for many years up there, Farnsy looks around and says, wait a second, there's this roll of Necco wafers, half eaten. What's this doing here? I didn't remember buying that or eating that. And then later on that day, he checks around and he finally finds that his father's fishing lure, a jitterbug, one of those little jitterbug lures you may recall, is missing. And that's when the mystery gets personal. Over the course of the summer, I introduced various characters. One of my favorites is Henry, the Maine Coon cat, based loosely on our mouse catcher back in our cottage right now, who's probably napping. But he's kind of a little character. Basically, when I started thinking about this book, what it was emerging, somewhere in the process, I thought I needed to give readers who might not ever have been to Maine, may not go to Maine, may not even think about having a vacation in Maine, in setting the location and giving the background. So I went back 200 million years, actually, to start off there. And I wanted to give you, the reader, a grounding in what this place was, Maine, and what funneled down from that big picture background down to Farnsy sitting in the first chapter in his cruiser there, to establish this place. And I also wanted to establish the kind of a lightly humorous tone so that people didn't think this was some kind of geology textbook about rocks. So I'll start off the prologue. In 1912, Alfred Wegener, a German scientist, hypothesized that all of the Earth's continents were slowly floating around more than 200 million years ago. Talk about going back to the background. Having once been jigsawed together in a huge Ur-continent, a primal landmass he called Pangaea. Like all new theories, it was ridiculed until many years after Professor Wegener's death. Thanks, kid. Modern geologists determined that the good man was right all along. In other words, if you were out in Pembroke Point in Maine 200 million years ago, you might have seen Morocco from your Adirondack chair. But Pangaea split up and the pieces drifted apart like old friends. When the mild, thick sheet of ice blanketing Maine began to melt 25,000 years ago, the state's flooded coastline unzipped in a tattered confusion of peninsulas and speckled islands. The first humans arrived in this region around 12,000 years ago and found land and waters teeming with life. Damariscotta is where police officer William Phineas Farnsworth grew up, and Damariscotta Lake is where his father taught him how to J-stroke and paddle a canoe quietly enough to be able to net a sleeping sun turtle. It's where Farnsy and his younger sister Grace paddled out to a little island to pick blueberries for their mother's pies and their father's pancakes. And it's near where Farnsy's grandfather took him every spring to a secret spot to show him how to pick fiddleheads so the ferns would grow back the next year. It's where his father Jack once cast a fishing lure with such power that it wrapped around a branch too high up to get it down. And it's where his mother Lily told him, "There are a lot of fish in the sea, Willie." Which is what his parents called him then. When his first girlfriend in high school, Lucy, broke it off. Farnsy was too serious, she said. After college, Farnsy knocked around odd jobs down in Boston like a boat with a broken rudder. Late March one year, on an impulse, Farnsy hopped on a bus back up to Damariscotta so he could get on the lake with his father on opening day of fishing season. And one morning, as Farnsy remembered it, while his father was frying up some bacon on the griddle, his mother mentioned something about the Maine Criminal Justice Academy over in Vassalboro. She'd heard the chief was looking for a patrol officer. Looking back, Farnsy said he could almost feel the tide turning. So that's how we get to the first chapter with Farnsy sitting in the cruiser. I want to read two more snippets. One is the haircut scene when Farnsy, the chief has basically set Farnsy up for a little practical joke. The chief has heard that Lucy's back in town with a part-time summer gig at one of the haircutting salons, and he's encouraged Farnsy to go get trimmed. He says that the police he said that Farnsy is looking a little bit shaggy. So Farnsy goes over to this salon. This is the haircut in the summer. And Lucy, by the way, is she's on again, off again, Lucy. Farnsy saw her standing there as soon as he opened the door, both of her hands on the back of the swivel chair, and realized the whole thing. The new state haircut guidelines, the coupon, the appointment, everything was a setup. He was on stage without a script, and everyone else was in on it. Lucy Granger smiled that smile of hers, the one that started slow and then grew. Her hair looked different than the last time he'd seen her, a touch of blonde now, and he had all he could do to keep from asking her if she wanted to come out to the cottage for a glass of wine. Then crossed that idea out as fast as he thought of it. Never mixed police work with pleasure, he'd learned at the academy. Now here she was again, and it all came back to him fast. The door to the salon closed behind him, and Farnsy sank into the chair as Lucy enveloped him with a snappy new striped cape and tugged it around his neck, snug, then pinned it. Trapped. No escape now. Lucy had been on his mind off and on all winter and spring, and now here she was, and she'd never looked better. Those brown eyes of her and that smile, how he missed the sound of her voice and those conversations they had that just seemed endless. And when they did, he liked how they usually ended. But Lucy always surprised him. She was a mystery he'd probably never solve. But like Doc once said, some mysteries you don't want to solve, because if it did, then they'd be over for good. Okay, Lucy, you got me now. She sized him up, looking from the mirror to his face and back again like she wasn't sure which Farnsy she preferred. You know, I think Chief's right. Your hair's getting a little, let's say, rakish. Some girls might like it that way, Farnsy, but for a cop, it's kind of shaggy. All Farnsy could think of was Samson and Delilah as he watched her in the mirror, combing up tufts of hair, her scissors clicking, and her shorts rustling against his arm now and then, and he couldn't think of a thing to say that was honest. Farnsy decided the best bet was to pretend this was a hostage situation and go with the flow. So he let her talk and listened. Wasn't that what women said they wanted in those magazine surveys, he wondered? Earl's just Earl, she said. Can't help it if he smells like fish. Always spent more time out there in his boat with bait fish and lobster than he ever did with people, or women, or me. Farnsy looked up and their eyes met briefly. Why was it every time they met, it felt like there were two ships passing in the night? I was young, and old Earl was all talk, promises me he's going to sell his boat and get a camp out near Rangeley Lake. Take the Maine guide exam, he says, and start taking sports out fishing. Sounded good. Then he says he could build cabins out there for people from away, off-grid, he says. So I told him he was off something all right. He was off as a rocker. Next thing he says, maybe he could save enough for us to go down to Florida every winter. If those Canucks can do it, so can we, Earl says. Lucy paused. So then I'd tell him, well, Earl, I took French in high school. Maybe I should have married some guy from Quebec then. She continued around to the back of his head, taking slow measure of each cut. Anyway, if you're wondering why, Farnsy looked up and caught her eyes in the mirror again and followed them as much as he could while she snipped here and there. He assumed she was trying out some new technique. If you're wondering why I'm here, well, it's simple. I've done a lot of thinking since I saw you last fall out at Pemaquid when we went out to your favorite spot there in the rocks and we just sat there. Farnsy wasn't even going to try to figure out what she was trying to say to him now. Doc told him once that men and women communicating is like an Irish movie where you know they're speaking English and you get the drift, but you can't understand a damn thing they're saying. Farnsy couldn't tell if Lucy was trying to jumpstart things or tell him goodbye for good. She pulled back to look him in the eyes and said, you're a good man, Farnsy, a real good man. I can see it in your eyes, but not now. I can't, at least not right now. I got to let you go. You better go. You know, catch and release. Okay, Luce. He brushed a few hairs from his tunic. Some of them looked gray. Thanks for the trim and everything. You take care, you know. I will, Farnsy. You know, it's not like goodbye forever. More like see you later. Around town, you know. Not like you're going anywhere. Wait, I didn't mean it that way. Shoot, I'm so sorry. I just got to figure some things out. Farnsy waited. Good cop technique. Let them talk. I need space, Farnsy. I feel like life is closing in on me sometimes, trapped like one of Earl's lobsters. Can you believe I've never even been to Boston? Farnsy didn't think she'd missed all that much. No offense, Lucy, but there's more space up here in Maine than in all of Boston. You're probably right, though, taking time. I love you, Farnsy, always will. Take care of yourself out there. You're a good cop, but be careful. He was going to give her one last hug and say maybe something like, love you too, or don't worry about me, but she was already on her way to the back room. So he turned around and walked out into the summer sunshine. A new man, maybe, but more confused than an hour earlier. When it came to Lucy, it seemed he always thought of the right thing to say the next day. So that's the introduction to Lucy, and she's back in town. And again, I don't want to reveal disclose the full secret, but it's on again, off again, and decisions have to be made. The last snippet I want to read, if we have time, I think we have time for one brief snippet, is from the early bird. In the fall, late fall, there's the early bird sale, which many of you have been to, and I've seen a few times here when we've stayed longer. And a call comes into the station. It's a short piece, 2 pages, and then we'll open up to questions and discussion or what have you. And the call is coming to the station that there's a shoplifter caught at Rennie's. The Rennie's on the main street that sells clothing. I guess it's a flagship Rennie's, if I'm not mistaken. So Farnsy arrives at Rennie's. Inside, Farnsy spotted Louise Willett, one of the sales clerks. By the way, one of the effort to write scenes like this was to show Farnsy bumping up against people and how he engages with the local populace. Paul Doiron said something at a recent conference I went to, the Maine Crime Wave conference. He was asked, can a location be a character in a novel? And he instantly said no. Somebody else in the panel agreed with him that it cannot be a character. And to that point, I kind of thought of Damariscotta as sort of a character in the background, obviously the setting for the story. And Paul Doiron's comment was, it can't be a character, but it can help you reveal characters by the way they interact with that setting. So here's Farnsy interacting with this young woman. He spotted Louise Willett, one of the sales clerks at Rennie's, standing next to a youngish woman, maybe early 30s, a stroller with what appeared to be twins, babies, and 2 more children, one of them holding her hand and the other clutching one of her mom's legs. Farnsy, thanks for coming over here so fast. This lady here tried to swipe 2 pairs of kids' boots just now, stuffed 1 pair in there behind her twins in the stroller, and hid the other pair underneath. She took a breath. Caught it all on the CCTV if you want to see it, but I got a witness, new gal over there, who just started. She was coming out of the toilet in the back and caught the whole transaction, she added, then crossed her arms as if to say, Farnsy, what are you going to do about it now? Thanks, Louise. Good work, Farnsy said. Farnsy turned to the young woman with the stroller and said, what's your name, miss? I'm Officer Farnsworth. I'm Emma Spencer. And I can explain, officer. Sorry, it's not in the text. I can explain, officer. These the boots in question here, Farnsy asked, pointing to the boots Louise had up on the counter as evidence. Emma nodded. My kids keep growing, she said, faster than I can keep up. And my husband's off somewhere. Then she broke down sobbing. She said she knew it wasn't any excuse. I wasn't trained that way, she said. Her sobs came from somewhere deep down. Farnsy wondered if she was okay, if maybe there was something else. He couldn't see any bruises, but winter scarves cover up a lot. He asked her if things were okay at home, and she nodded yes, no hesitation. Farnsy and Louise looked at each other. Louise looked away at the register, then the boots again, and finally back to Farnsy. The same thing Henry the cat did when that cat wanted Farnsy to feed him. First that stare, then a glance over to the bag of cat food, then back to staring at Farnsy. Like the chief said, most language isn't spoken. Louise looked back at the boots, sitting there all brand new. Farnsy asked Louise, how much for the boots? She had already printed out a receipt as evidence, so she handed it to Farnsy, who pulled a debit card out of his wallet and handed it to Louise. This should cover it. Louise looked startled but nodded. Then Farnsy pulled out 5 fresh ATM 20s and slipped the bills into Emma's hands. Get yourself something warm too, Emma. Winter's coming in. Emma hesitated, then looked at Farnsy as if to say, you for real? She tried to give him a hug, but he waved it off. Wouldn't want folks to start talking now, Emma. I've already given them enough to talk about. But you're a real good mom, he said, loud enough for the folks standing in line to hear. You are doing your best to keep your kids warm. You just made a little U-turn here. And that's the encounter with Emma. I want to borrow a quote from my own book, from the Clink Kid chapter about the kid who's has a scam going on with Clink tabs. Quote, like the chief always said, a good cop is 1 part cop, 1 part priest, 1 part psychologist, 1 part judge, and 1 part something else, but he never could remember what that thing was. Whatever it was, it added up to way more than 100%. So in that sense, I really was trying to show policemen in a light that is not common these days. Thanks very much. I apologize for the tears. Sometimes, I told you, sometimes it's funny to read the stuff you've written. If you folks have any questions or comments, I'd happily entertain them. I don't see any tomatoes being thrown, so that's a good sign. Yeah, certainly, yes, ma'am.
Overall, how long did it take you to write this book? You know, all things over in your mind.
Should I be honest?
Yeah.
I started in, as I said, 2009 approximately, started writing these, I didn't know where I was going. I was writing the other novels, about 450 pages. It's in draft back in Evanston. But these things emerged. So it started slow, drip method. It took that many years. I'd say I started writing just Farnsy. I dropped the other novel to focus on Farnsy because it was so much easier, I would say easier to write, but it was so much more pleasurable to write than this darker and gloomier German novel. As we know, all German novels have to be a little bit dark and gloomy. Then it became more Farnsy, and I was writing pretty much every day for a while, and then I'd have these spots where I would do something else and let it down, let somebody else read it and come back and revise and edit. So it became kind of a warp and weft of editing and writing. And I'll tell you that even recently, and I think it was in January, February of this year, I realized I had the word slowly 3 times in the first 2 paragraphs of the prologue. And I said, how the heck did that happen? That's what I'm talking about, whack-a-mole. And I said, that's just crazy. And once you see that mistake, you just can't edit it out of your head. So that came out. There's only 1 slowly now. Did I answer your question?
No.
I didn't answer.
So what, 2 or 3 years, and then you concentrate on really trying to finish it up?
Yeah, the first few years were just Farnsy as a prompt. You know, I was writing it, and Steve Pfeiffer or Sharon Pfeiffer would give us a prompt, and it always became a Farnsy. It wasn't always Farnsworth. And by the way, Farnsworth is the name of a real estate company back in Evanston. And then it became intensive. So I would say, especially during COVID, we were here for a year and a half in our cottage in Edgecombe, and that was unpleasant but pleasant chance to simply say, I've got no excuses. Farnsy's got to get done, and you got to pull it together. And so I was still cutting chapters. You know, there's some stuff that's nice little material, but it doesn't fit Farnsy. It wasn't the.
Did you do an outline?
No.
Or you wrote
no.
as it sort of talked to you?
As it came to me. And I would say I would write something in summertime, and then it wasn't even summer where I was writing it. It might be summertime then, or I'd write something about winter. And usually it was kind of a thought would come to my mind. I'd say, well, okay, he's at the Waltz Soda Fountain, and there's an interaction there, and you start writing, one sentence leads to another sentence leads to another sentence unexpectedly. It's a strange process. But the fact is that I started journaling in 2000. The book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, got me writing daily journals, and those journals spun into memoirs, and that became kind of, okay, let's try some fiction here. The difference between memoir and fiction is not that great. Anyway, I hope I answered your question. So it wasn't altogether compressed, probably 3 weeks, I don't know. But I'm a procrastinator by nature. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Our book group is going to do your book.
I've heard ruminations that it's a small town. Yeah, but
You can come join us.
I'm taking Carolyn and the cat and the dog back to Evanston for about 4 or 5 days. What's that?
When is it?
Oh, when is it? It's in September, right?
Yeah. So early on, you used the word scribbling.
Yeah.
Did you use any technology to take notes, to write, or was it all scribbling?
Interesting question. And by the way, I have to come. If it's in September, that's fine. I should be here. We're just going away. I'm going away for a week, and I'll fly back, and I'll be here for another month and a half or so. We have a grandchild coming. I started actually writing, and back when I started writing, realizing that I loved writing, and I'd always been write letters and write speeches or write talks or write classroom stuff. I got a really fancy German pen and with really good German ink, and I would write in my journal with that really good German pen and German ink. Didn't make the stuff I was writing any better. And then I moved to Uniball. I love the Uniball because it rolls really smoothly, and I wanted to just write unimpeded. The real fight was not to edit what I was writing, just to write and go back and edit later on. So, and then eventually I said, okay, it's kind of a pain to take what you've written, scribbled. If you can read my handwriting, you probably know Chinese. So I would translate that onto my laptop, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna write at the laptop. Consequently, a couple of the letters in my laptop, the keyboard, they're totally eradicated. The A and the S for some reason, I don't know. But that's how I would that was my extent of technology. I thought of using a little recorder to record stories and just sort of let it roll that way, but I couldn't quite do that. It just didn't work for me. I hope that answers your question.
It does. A little tiny follow-up.
Yeah.
How do you capture quickly, before you lose those thoughts you talked about losing, where? In a little notebook, literally, or do you have a speak into kind of device?
Well, here you go. This thing, as a writer, Frank Morehouse in Australia turned me onto this. It's a little thing where 3x5 cards fit in there. I don't know where I got it, and I probably could do a pitch for that product as well, but it's pretty nifty, and I would just drop things down. And I learned very fast that if you forgot something, didn't write it down, you'd never get back to it. It's just really hard to go brain cranial archaeology and dig up old phrases or something somebody said. That was a prompt too. Sometimes you'd see a person, I'd say, for a couple of years, I would sit in town or back in Evanston and try to figure out, what does Lucy look like? Who is Lucy? And I never found that person, that face, or that persona, nor did I for Farnsy. It was just an internal thing. The way they talked and the way they behaved was the way I wanted to describe them. I don't want to make it too mystical, but I think everybody, as I said before, we all tell stories. We're all writers of a sense. We just don't maybe write them all down. We've got writers in the audience like Larry and others, I'm sure. So right on, Jeff, I know. Any other questions, folks? Yes.
Did you actually spend time sitting at Waltz's fountain?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah.
You're really sitting there saying, I think I'm going to use that.
No, you want to know the story?
The donuts.
My wife just pointed out the donuts. We'll talk later. Yeah, I spent a lot of time at Waltz's. In fact, when we first started renting up here on Damascotta Lake, I'd bring my future sons-in-law. I didn't know they were future sons-in-law, but I'd bring these boys over to Waltz's, and I'd say, let's just sit there and listen. And sometimes you'd have the great good fortune to have somebody with a Maine accent. I know a couple of the folks' names. You'd hear this wonderful accent, mellifluous accent, and you'd go, okay, that's it. One time I was sitting there alone, and the gal behind the counter, who was not Becky, it was somebody else. And I was listening in, maybe too intently. I wasn't taking notes, but I was just listening. And she came over and said, "Do we amuse you?" And I've been outed. And I said, "Ma'am," I said, "I come here just, I love to hear the Maine accent. That's what I'm here for." That was it. If she wasn't nasty, she was just, just wondering, who is this hoot from away, I try to blend in, but sometimes you can't blend in. But yeah, Waltz was a favorite. I didn't write, but I wasn't like Doc writing the daily, in the back.
Can you ruin a piece by re-editing
Yeah.
or over-re-editing?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of those points where it doesn't hum, where you just say, "You gods, put the pen down or stop typing." As Carolyn will attest, there are times, even recently, where you're going through and again, "God, why did I say it that way? I could have said that word." I'm really sensitive to the words and repetition and the sound of words, and I don't want to hype that up, but that's what I do. So, but there comes a point where you go, okay, do you say basked in the sunlight or bathed in the sunlight or whatever the phrase is? That wasn't one of them, but you go, leave it, just leave it. Because it's like when you're in painting class, as we know, we're painters, you can, and Jane knows, where's Jane back here? You can keep slopping, in my case, slopping stuff on there, and you go, okay, now I've ruined it. You ball it up and have to start over again. So I didn't want to do that. You can do that. You can overwrite. You can write such that it becomes so precious that the soul is knocked out of it, I think. Have I lulled you into the stupor with my Jane,
Well,
please.
I'm just going to say that this book has soul, and I loved reading it. It's just delightful. You don't make fun of anything. You love this area, and it comes through.
Yeah, that was, as I was telling somebody earlier, it was the litmus test. We have two neighbors, Carol and Nort, and I thought, okay, they grew up here, they know this place so well. That's when I say you go from this private endeavor where you go, I like this stuff, and sometimes you chuckle, you go, I don't know who's writing this stuff, but it's really kind of funny. And you go, wait a second, now it's going to be on paper, and somebody else is going to read it they know me, but other people who don't know me at all, what are they going to think about it? Oh God, I'm going to get, first the chief of police is going to arrest me for impersonating a writer, our neighbor's going to say, well, these are 6 things you got wrong. Damascott is actually on this side of the river or whatever. And I go, okay, I just have to let go. That's what happened, and I did. Did I answer your question, Jane? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, it takes courage to write a book. Real courage.
Yeah, I'm not.
And I think you succeeded.
Yeah.
You
Well,
said some wonderful things. It was funny, and it sweeps along. You don't want to put it down. It's a good book.
Thank you. One of the questions I asked my writers group, and they were also encouraging and had criticisms too early on. I said, over and again, I would ask Carolyn too and others, does this make Mainers seem simple? Or does it make policemen, does it make fun of police work? Is there anything derogatory about Maine? I really wanted to avoid. That's one thing you very intentionally steer in one direction. I think we all have other sides, and a city, a town like Damascott certainly. But this is just what came out of my pen or my laptop, as the case may be. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it.